Your Honor, my body cam glitched. That audio's out of context. I didn't plant anything, I secured the scene, that's it.
In my 20 years on the bench, I have learned one critical truth about human nature. The most dangerous lie is not the one spoken with a tremor of fear. The most dangerous lie is the one wrapped in confidence, cloaked in authority, and protected by a shining badge. On the morning of November 14th, my courtroom was unnaturally quiet. The air was thick, heavy, as if a storm were brewing. Case number 492C sat neatly on my desk, but its weight was anything but light. The defendant today wasn't a street criminal or a spoiled rich kid. Standing before me was Officer Derek Miller, a star of the city police department, a man who had just received a Medal of Valor 3 months prior. But Miller didn't walk into my courtroom like a man seeking justice. He walked in like a king strolling through his territory. His uniform was pressed without a single wrinkle. His leather shoes shone under the overhead lights, and on his chest, medals glinted as if challenging anyone who dared to doubt him. He didn't look at me. He swept his eyes over the victim, huddled on the other side with a smirk, the sneer of a man who knows the rules of the game and believes he is the one writing them. The victim was Elias Thorne, a 4-year-old piano teacher. Elias sat there, his right arm in a stark white cast suspended across his chest, his face still bearing bruises that were fading into a sickly yellow. He looked small, trembling, and completely overwhelmed by Miller's presence. Elias was charged with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. According to the police report, Elias had attacked Officer Miller during a routine traffic stop, forcing Miller to use force to subdue him. I looked down at the file. Everything seemed perfect. The report was meticulously written, the witnesses were Miller's colleagues, and most importantly, there was no visual evidence. Officer Miller, my voice rang out, cold and sharp, cutting through the smugness radiating from the defense table. In the report, you stated that the suspect, Elias Thorne, lunged at you with a foreign object, forcing you to take self-defense measures, resulting in the suspect's broken arm. Do you affirm that this testimony is the absolute truth? Miller stood tall, chin lifted high. His voice boomed, full of authority, the voice used to commanding others. Your Honor, Judge Boyd, I affirm it. That is the truth. I followed protocol to protect myself and the safety of the community. I tapped my finger lightly on the oak desk. Protocol. I repeated the word. Slowly. Department protocol requires every officer to activate their body-worn camera immediately upon initiating contact with a citizen. However, I do not see any footage in the evidence file. Why is that, Officer Miller? This is the moment where most people would flinch. A blink, a sharp breath, or an unconscious lick of the lips. But not Miller. He was prepared for this question. He even seemed to be expecting it. Your Honor, Miller replied, his tone shifting to a perfectly feigned regret that was terrifying in its precision. Unfortunately, my equipment experienced a technical malfunction at that exact moment. The battery was loose, or the software glitched. Technical support is still checking it. When the incident occurred, the screen went black. The camera was off. Nothing was recorded. He shrugged, a gesture of feigned helplessness, but his eyes gleamed with defiance. His silent message was clear. No video. My word is law. Who will believe a frail music teacher over a police hero? You can't touch me, Judge. Miller's lawyer, a slick man named Harold Vance, stood up to add, Your Honor, my client has an impeccable service record. His testimony carries more weight than any faulty piece of electronic equipment. We move to dismiss all baseless allegations of misconduct from Mr. Thorne and recommend the maximum sentence for resisting an officer. I looked at Elias Thorne. The young man hung his head, his left hand trembling as it clutched the hem of his shirt. He knew who he was up against. He knew how this world worked. His word was just a grain of sand against the fortress of Officer Miller. In Elias's eyes, I saw the despair of someone who had accepted that justice was just a hollow word in a textbook. But Miller had made a mistake that arrogant men often make when they believe power is an eternal shield. He thought this trial was his stage. He thought I was just a puppet in a black robe, sitting here to rubber stamp the script he had already written. I took off my glasses, slowly wiping the lenses with a small silk cloth. This is my habit when I smell the stench of lies. And the stench of lies from Officer Miller was so pungent it overpowered the smell of old wood in the courtroom. He said the camera was off. He said nothing was recorded. He believed the darkness would cover his sins. I put my glasses back on, looking straight into Miller's eyes. This time, I didn't blink. Officer Miller, I said, my voice dropping low, carrying the weight of the approaching storm. Do you know why they call me Judge Boyd? Not because I am lenient, but because I believe in one thing only. In my courtroom, the truth never goes dark. You say the device malfunctioned? You say the camera was off? I paused, letting the silence wrap around the room. Miller started to feel uncomfortable. The smirk on his lips stiffened just a fraction. Yes, Your Honor, he replied. But this time, his voice didn't boom like before. I leaned forward, my gaze sharp as a scalpel. Then, Officer Miller, how will you explain what I am about to show everyone right now? Harold Vance, Miller's attorney, shot up from his seat like a spring-loaded trap. Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush. The prosecution stated clearly in discovery that the body camera footage was corrupted and unrecoverable. You cannot introduce surprise evidence in the middle of a trial. This is a violation of due process. Miller nodded in agreement, his eyes narrowing. He looked at me, not with fear, but with the annoyance of a man whose time is being wasted by a bureaucratic technicality. He still believed he was untouchable. He still believed that the corruption of that file was absolute because he was likely the one who ensured it was corrupted. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You are correct. The body camera footage file was indeed corrupted. The IT department at the precinct confirmed that the file header was destroyed, rendering the video unplayable through standard means. I paused, letting Miller relax just a fraction of an inch. Then I tightened the noose. However, you seem to have forgotten a fundamental rule of modern policing technology, Officer Miller. Or perhaps, in your haste to secure your version of the truth, you simply became careless. I picked up a small USB drive from my desk and held it up. It caught the courtroom light, a tiny piece of plastic and metal that weighed less than a gram, yet held the weight of an entire career. This, I continued, is not the body camera file. This is the telemetry data and the synchronized recording from the automated vehicle locator system in your patrol cruiser. You see, when you initiated the traffic stop, your cruiser's dashboard camera automatically engaged. And while you were very careful to position Mr. Thorne in the blind spot of the dash cam's visual field, you forgot about the audio buffer. Miller's face went rigid. The color didn't drain from it immediately. It was more like a statue freezing in time. He knew. In that split second, he remembered the cruiser. He remembered the distance. Furthermore, I added, looking at the court clerk, the prosecution's forensic specialist didn't just look at the video file. They looked at the metadata of your body camera device itself. The system logs every button press, every power cycle, and every manual override. You claimed the battery died. You claimed it was a glitch. I signaled to the bailiff. Dim the lights. Play Exhibit A. The large screen to my left flickered to life. The courtroom fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. The video that appeared wasn't the body cam footage. It was a digital reconstruction of the device logs, synchronized with the grainy, distant audio from the patrol car's dash cam. On the screen, a timeline appeared. 10, 14, and 2 seconds p.m. Officer Miller exits vehicle. 10, 14, and 15 seconds p.m. Audio from dash cam captures Miller shouting, "Get out of the car, music boy." The audio was faint but distinct. There was no fear in Elias Thorne's voice, only confusion. "Officer, I'm unbuckling my seatbelt. My hands are visible. 10, 14, and 30 seconds p.m. The screen showed a log entry from the body cam device, manual power down, sequence initiated. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a loose battery. The log proved it. Miller had held the power button down for 3 seconds to force a shutdown. "You turned it off," I said, my voice cutting through the dark room. "You didn't lose power, Officer Miller. You executed a premeditated decision to remove the mechanical witness from your chest. But the audio continued, and this is where the arrogance truly shattered. From the speakers, we heard Miller's voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the night air. You think that fancy degree makes you better than me? You think you can correct me on a traffic violation? Then, the sound of a dull thud, a sickening, wet impact, then Elias's voice, high-pitched with pain. I didn't do anything. Please. Then, another thud, and the sound of something snapping, like a dry branch being stepped on in a winter forest. That was Elias's arm breaking. The audio ended. The lights came back up. I looked at Derek Miller. The king was naked. The hero's armor had dissolved. He wasn't looking at the gallery anymore. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. His lawyer, Vance, was frantically flipping through papers, trying to find a loophole that didn't exist. The log shows you turned off the camera 10 seconds before the physical altercation began, I stated, reading from the report. That is not self-defense, officer. That is hunting. That is a predator clearing the brush so he can attack his prey without being seen. Miller stood up. His hands were fists at his sides. That audio, it's out of context. He was reaching for something. I saw a weapon. The logs don't show what I saw. Sit down, I bellowed, the sound of my gavel striking the block like a gunshot. You are not in charge here, Mr. Miller. You forfeited your right to dictate the narrative the moment you tried to delete it. I turned to the jury, who looked horrified. Then I turned back to Miller. But that is not the only thing the investigation uncovered, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. Because when you manually shut down that camera, you triggered a failsafe you clearly didn't know existed. A failsafe designed for exactly this kind of corruption. Miller looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine, primal fear in his eyes. What failsafe? He whispered. The 30-second post-shutdown cache, I answered, a small, cold smile touching my lips. The camera doesn't stop recording immediately, Miller. It saves the last 30 seconds to an encrypted partition to prevent accidental data loss during combat. And guess what? We found the key. Harold Vance looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. He stammered, his confident legal jargon failing him for the first time. Your Honor, I must object. The defense was not made aware of any cache partition. This is a violation of discovery rules. This is trial by ambush. Mr. Vance, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a register that vibrated through the bench. This partition was only discovered because your client attempted to destroy the primary file. This is not an ambush. This is spoliation of evidence. The court does not protect those who burn the map just because they don't want us to find the body. I turned to the bailiff. Play the cache. Miller didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the black screen as if it were an abyss, staring back. The screen flickered. The timestamp resumed exactly where the log had ended. 100 p.m. The angle was from Miller's chest. We saw his hand reach up, a gloved finger pressing the lens, trying to cover it while simultaneously hitting the power button. The image blurred for a second, obscured by black leather, then cleared. The camera was supposed to be off. Miller thought it was off. On the screen, the image was tilted, capturing the scene from a slightly lower angle as Miller leaned into the car. There was Elias Thorne. He wasn't lunging. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was clutching the steering wheel with white knuckles, his eyes wide with absolute terror. Please, Elias whispered on the recording. I'm not moving. I'm not moving. Miller's voice came from behind the camera, dripping with contempt. Too late for that. We watched as Miller grabbed Elias by the collar of his jacket. There was no struggle. Elias went limp, trying to comply, trying to be non-threatening. But Miller didn't want compliance. He wanted dominance. He yanked Elias out of the sedan with such force that Elias's shoe caught on the doorframe, sending him tumbling onto the asphalt. The camera shook violently, capturing the blur of pavement and streetlights. Then, the brutality. Miller didn't check for weapons. He didn't handcuff the suspect. He dropped a knee hard into Elias's back. The sound of air leaving Elias's lungs was sickeningly clear on the high-fidelity audio of the cache. Stop resisting, Miller screamed for the benefit of the dashcam audio, creating his false narrative in real time. I'm not, Elias wheezed, face pressed into the gravel. Then came the moment that made the jury look away. Miller grabbed Elias's left arm, twisted it behind his back, and kept twisting. He pulled it upward, past the natural range of motion. We saw the strain in the fabric of Elias's shirt. We saw Miller's knuckles turn white. Snap. The sound was louder in the courtroom than I expected. It echoed off the walls. On the witness bench, Elias Thorne flinched, clutching his cast as if he could feel the bone breaking all over again. But the video didn't end there. The cache had 5 seconds left. Miller stood up, breathing heavily. He looked down at the writhing man on the ground. Then, he looked directly down at his own chest, right into the lens of the camera he believed was dead. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief. It wasn't the smile of a man who had just survived a dangerous encounter. It was the smile of a predator who had just enjoyed the hunt. He tapped the lens with his finger, tap, tap, as if to say good night. Then the screen went black. The 30 seconds were up. The silence in my courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a lie is not just exposed, but eviscerated. I looked at Officer Miller. He was no longer the king of his domain. He was pale, sweating, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that wasn't there. "You smiled," I said. It wasn't a question. Miller tried to speak, but his voice cracked. It was adrenaline. You don't know what it's like out there. You sit in this air-conditioned room. You don't know the stress. Do not. I cut him off, leaning forward until I felt the wood of the bench press against my ribs, presumed to lecture me on stress. Stress is being a single mother working 2 jobs. Stress is a soldier in a war zone. Stress is a piano teacher wondering if he will ever play again because a man with a badge decided to break his arm for sport. I stood up. I rarely stand up during a trial unless I am leaving, but I needed to be on my feet for this. That smile, Mr. Miller, that was the most damning piece of evidence I have seen in a decade. It told me everything. You didn't break his arm because you were afraid. You broke it because you could. You turned off that camera not to save battery, but to create a private theater for your cruelty. I looked at the jury. Their faces were hardened. The verdict was already written in their eyes. The formalities were just a delay. "Mr. Vance," I said to the defense attorney, who had slumped into his chair, defeated, "do you have any redirect? Do you have any explanation for why your client smirked at a camera he thought was disabled after snapping a citizen's bone?" Vance stood up slowly. He looked at Miller, then at me. He closed his folder. "No questions, Your Honor." Miller looked at his lawyer in betrayal. "What? You have to fix this. Tell them about the procedure. Tell them about the threat assessment." "Sit down, Derek," Vance whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "It's over." But it wasn't over. Not for me. Because as I looked at the department representatives sitting in the back row, the chief of police and the internal affairs liaison, I saw something that disturbed me even more than the video. They weren't surprised. They looked angry. Yes, embarrassed, certainly, but not surprised. "Chief O'Connell," I called out to the back of the room. The chief froze. "Please approach the bench." The chief of police walked up to the bar, looking like a man marching to the gallows. "Chief," I said, keeping my voice low so only the front row could hear, though the microphone picked up every syllable. "This glitch with the body cameras. How many times has Officer Miller reported a similar malfunction in the last year?" The chief hesitated. He looked at Miller. He looked at the floor. "Answer me," I ordered. "6 times, Your Honor," the chief whispered. 6 times, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. 6 times the lights went out. 6 times the evidence vanished. And 6 times you gave him a commendation instead of an investigation. I looked back at Miller. The fear in his eyes had turned to a cold, hard hatred. "This trial is no longer just about a broken arm," I announced to the room. "We are now discussing a systemic pattern of cover-ups." Chief O'Connell, a man who had likely faced down armed robbers and riot crowds without blinking, looked as though he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. He cleared his throat, a sound that grated against the silence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice tight, "equipment fails. We operate on a budget. We can't penalize a decorated officer for faulty wiring." I stared at him over the rim of my glasses. The excuse was so thin it was insulting. "Faulty wiring doesn't twist a man's arm until the bone snaps, Chief," I said, my voice cutting through his defense like a razor. Faulty wiring doesn't smile at the lens after inflicting pain, and faulty wiring certainly doesn't selectively fail only when a suspect is being injured. I reached under my bench and pulled out a thick stack of manila folders. I dropped them onto the desk with a heavy thud that made Miller jump in his seat. I anticipated you might say that, I continued, watching O'Connell's eyes widen as he recognized the department's stamps on the files. So, while the jury was selected this morning, I had my clerk pull the dockets for those 6 other malfunctions you mentioned. Do you know what I found? I didn't wait for an answer. I opened the first file, case 302A, June 12th, suspect, a 60-year-old grandmother, charge, resisting arrest, injury, dislocated shoulder, body camera status, corrupted file. I flipped to the next one, the pages rustling loudly in the quiet room. Case 315B, August 4th, suspect, a teenager skateboarding, charge, assault on an officer, injury, broken nose and concussion, body camera status, battery failure. I looked up at O'Connell. He was sweating now, beads of perspiration forming on his forehead under the courtroom lights. 6 times, Chief. 6 citizens injured, 6 charges of resisting arrest, and 6 times, the only objective witness, the camera conveniently went blind. And in every single case, you signed off on the internal review clearing Officer Miller of wrongdoing. I leaned forward. That is not a hardware issue. That is a culture issue. You didn't just ignore the red flags. You painted over them with commendations. At the defense table, Miller was unraveling. He looked from me to his chief, his breathing becoming ragged. He was realizing that the protection he thought was absolute, the blue wall of silence, was cracking under the weight of the evidence. He was looking for a lifeline, a nod, something from O'Connell to say, "We got this." But O'Connell wouldn't meet his eyes. The chief was staring straight ahead, already calculating how to save his own career, how to distance himself from the rogue element. Miller saw it. The betrayal hit him harder than any punch. "You said you'd handle it," Miller suddenly shouted, leaping to his feet. His lawyer tried to grab him, but Miller shoved him away. He pointed a shaking finger at the chief of police. "You told me in your office! You said if the video was gone, the charges would stick. You signed the papers." "O'Connell!" "Silence!" O'Connell roared back, breaking protocol, his face turning purple. "Sit down, officer." "No!" Miller screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm not going down for this alone. You told us to be aggressive. You said clear the streets by any means necessary. You knew about the cash. You told Vance to bury it." Pandemonium erupted. The gallery gasped. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. Vance, the defense attorney, buried his face in his hands. I didn't bang my gavel. I didn't call for order. I let it play out. I let the truth spill onto the floor like blood from a wound. This was the moment the system turned on itself. I waited until Miller ran out of breath, until the echo of his accusation hung in the air like smoke. "Thank you, Officer Miller," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You have just entered a plea of guilt, not only for yourself, but implicated your superior officer in a conspiracy to obstruct justice." I turned to the court reporter. "I want that outburst transcribed verbatim. Every word." Then I looked at Chief O'Connell. The man looked defeated, stripped of his authority. "Chief," I said, "I am issuing a bench warrant for the seizure of all internal affairs communications regarding Derek Miller's employment, and I am submitting a formal request to the district attorney to open an investigation into your conduct." I turned back to Miller. He was standing there, panting, realizing too late that he had just handed me the keys to the entire department. "But we aren't done with you yet, Mr. Miller," I said, picking up the remote for the screen again. "Because while you were busy turning off your camera to hide your violence, you forgot that there are eyes everywhere in this city." I looked at Elias Thorne. For the first time, he was sitting up straight. The fear was gone, replaced by a dawn of vindication. "Mr. Vance," I addressed the lawyer, who looked ready to resign on the spot, "do you want to see Exhibit B? Or would you prefer to discuss a plea deal before I show the jury what happened after the camera went dark?" Harold Vance wiped sweat from his upper lip. He looked at his client, a man who had just implicated the entire police force in a conspiracy, and then back at me. He knew the ship was sinking, and he was frantically looking for a life raft. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice trembling slightly, We would like to request a brief recess to discuss a plea arrangement regarding the assault charges. My client is prepared to accept responsibility for the use of excessive force. I stared at him. It was a classic move. Admit to the lesser evil to hide the greater sin. They wanted to stop the bleeding before the jury saw the fatal wound. Denied, I said flatly. The time for negotiation was before you walked into my courtroom and lied to my face about technical malfunctions. The jury has heard the lie. Now they will see the rest of the truth. I nodded to the bailiff. Play Exhibit B. The screen flickered again. This time, the image wasn't the high-definition fisheye view of a body camera, nor the steady wide shot of a dash cam. It was grainy, black and white, and shot from a high angle. This footage, I explained to the silent room, was subpoenaed from the security system of Henderson's 24-hour market, located directly across the street from where Officer Miller decided to administer his version of justice. You see, officer, while you were focused on the darkness, you forgot about the neon sign above you. On the screen, we saw the patrol car and Elias's sedan. We saw Miller standing over Elias, who was writhing on the ground, clutching his broken arm. The timestamp showed 10, 15, and 10 seconds p.m., roughly 30 seconds after the body camera cache had cut out. Miller was pacing. He looked agitated. He kicked Elias in the ribs, a casual, cruel motion, like kicking a stray dog. The jury gasped. But then, Miller did something that shifted the atmosphere from shock to horror. He walked back to his patrol car. He didn't go to the radio to call for an ambulance. He didn't go to the medical kit. He opened the trunk. He rummaged around for a moment and pulled out a small, metallic object. It was a screwdriver, a long, flathead screwdriver with a yellow handle. Miller walked back to where Elias lay. He looked left. He looked right. He looked up at the streetlights, checking for witnesses. But he didn't look up at the ATM camera, mounted 12 feet above his head. He knelt down. He took Elias's right hand, the one that wasn't broken, and pressed the handle of the screwdriver into it. Then he wiped the handle with his own shirt and dropped it onto the pavement, inches from Elias's fingers. There it is, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it filled the room. The foreign object. The weapon you claimed Mr. Thorne lunged at you with. The justification for breaking a pianist's arm. Miller was shaking his head violently. No, that's not. I was securing the scene. I found it there. Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped. We just watched you take it from your own trunk. We watched you plant evidence on an injured man. You didn't just assault him, Miller. You tried to frame him. You were willing to send this innocent man to prison for 10 years for assault with a deadly weapon, just to cover up your own loss of temper. I looked at the jury. Their faces were a mixture of disgust and fury. The foreman was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. This changes everything, I announced. This is no longer a case of excessive force. This is perjury. This is fabrication of evidence. This is a felony committed under the color of law. I turned to Elias Thorne. He was weeping silently. For months, he had been living with the label of a criminal. He had been terrified that no one would believe him. Now, the world saw the truth. Mr. Vance, I said to the lawyer, who had now physically distanced himself from Miller on the bench, your motion to dismiss based on lack of evidence is formally denied with prejudice. And Officer Miller? Miller looked up. He looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his life disintegrate. I am revoking your bail immediately, I said. You are a danger to the community and a flight risk. Bailiff, take the defendant into custody. As the bailiff moved toward him, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The heavy oak doors didn't just open, they slammed against the back wall. Standing in the doorway wasn't another bailiff or a curious reporter. It was District Attorney Marcus Sterling, flanked by two men in dark suits who looked distinctly like federal agents. Sterling was a political animal. He wore suits that cost more than my car and had a smile that could freeze water. But today, he wasn't smiling. He looked like a man watching his poll numbers plummet in real time. Your Honor, Sterling shouted, striding down the aisle, ignoring the gasp of the gallery. I am intervening on behalf of the state. We are filing an emergency motion to seal these proceedings and transfer custody of the defendant to federal authorities immediately. He slapped a document onto my bench, his breathing heavy. This case has implications beyond this courtroom. It involves sensitive departmental protocols. We cannot have this. Spectac. Continue in open court. I looked at the document. It was a standard suppression order, usually reserved for cases involving national security or high-level informants. Sterling was trying to throw a blanket over the fire before it burned down the entire police department. Miller looked hopeful for the first time in 20 minutes. He saw the cavalry arriving. He thought the system was finally coming to save its own. I picked up the order. I read it slowly. Then I looked at Sterling over the rim of my glasses. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You are 3 years late." Sterling blinked. "Excuse me? You are 3 years late," I repeated, louder this time. Where was this urgency when Elias Thorne was booked? Where was this concern for justice? When Officer Miller broke the arm of a piano teacher, you didn't care then. You only care now because the cameras are rolling and the cockroach has been caught in the light. I tore the suppression order in half. The sound of the ripping paper was the only sound in the room. "Motion denied," I stated. "This is my courtroom, not your campaign stop, and we are not done with the evidence." Sterling turned red. "Judge Boyd, you are crossing a line. You are endangering an ongoing investigation." "I am the investigation," I roared, standing up again. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling, or I will have you removed for contempt." And looking at the bailiff, he seems very eager to use his handcuffs again. Sterling froze. He looked at the bailiff, then at the gallery, then at me. He realized he had no power here. He sat down in the front row, fuming. I turned back to the screen. The image of the yellow-handled screwdriver was still frozen there. "Now," I said, addressing the jury and the terrified Chief O'Connell. Before Mr. Sterling interrupted, we were discussing the screwdriver. The weapon Officer Miller claimed he was threatened with. I looked at Miller. "You said you found it on the scene. You said Mr. Thorne lunged at you with it." Miller nodded frantically, despite the video evidence. "Yes! I grabbed it from my trunk to secure it. I didn't plant it. I was preserving the chain of custody." It was a desperate lie, a nonsensical one, but I wasn't interested in his lies anymore. I was interested in his history. "Clerk," I said, "please pull up case file 104F from 2 years ago, the case of State versus Arthur Hayes." Miller's face went white, not pale white, like a sheet of paper. "Chief O'Connell," I said, "do you remember Arthur Hayes, a homeless veteran arrested by Officer Miller for aggravated assault in an alleyway behind a liquor store?" O'Connell didn't answer. He couldn't. The screen changed. It showed a police evidence photo from 2 years ago. It was a photo of a weapon recovered from the homeless man. It was a yellow-handled screwdriver. "Zoom in," I ordered. The image enlarged. There, on the rubber handle, was a distinct, deep scratch, a jagged mark that looked like the letter X. I pointed to the current evidence photo from Elias Thorne's arrest, the one still paused on the other screen. "Zoom in on Exhibit B," I commanded. The screens sat side by side. 2 different cases, 2 different years, 2 different victims, but the screwdriver was identical. The same yellow handle, the same size, and there, unmistakably, was the same jagged X scratched into the rubber grip. The courtroom erupted. This wasn't just planting evidence. This was recycling evidence. "It's a drop weapon," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You didn't just find it in your trunk, Miller. You carry it with you. You've been carrying it for years. You used it to frame a homeless man 2 years ago, and when he went to prison, you took it back out of evidence or kept a duplicate to use on your next victim." I looked at DA Sterling. "Is this the sensitive protocol you wanted to protect, Mr. Sterling? The protocol where your star officer carries a get-out-of-jail-free card in his trunk to frame innocent citizens whenever he loses his temper?" Sterling looked sick. He knew his career was effectively over. He looked at Miller with pure hatred. Miller was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face now. "It's not. I didn't. Everyone does it. It's insurance. You have to have insurance on the street." "Insurance?" I repeated, disgusted. "You call framing innocent people insurance?" I turned to Elias Thorne. Mr. Thorne, Arthur Hayes is currently serving a 5-year sentence in state prison because of this screwdriver, because of this man, because of this department. I looked at the chief of police. O'Connell was slumped in his seat, his head in his hands. This stops today, I declared. Bailiff, do not just take Officer Miller into custody. I want him placed in solitary confinement for his own protection, because once the general population finds out what he did to Arthur Hayes, I cannot guarantee his safety. And Chief O'Connell? I added. The chief looked up. Don't leave town, I warned, because I am unsealing the records on every single arrest Officer Miller has made in the last 5 years. And if I find one more yellow-handled screwdriver, one more malfunctioning camera, or one more resisting arrest charge without video, you will be sitting in that defendant's chair next to him. The chief nodded slowly. He knew it was the end. But Miller wasn't done. As the bailiff grabbed his arm, Miller snapped. He lunged not at me, not at the bailiff, but at his own lawyer, Harold Vance. You knew, Miller screamed, tackling the attorney to the ground. You told me to keep the kit. You said it was standard practice. Chaos in a courtroom is not like chaos in the movies. It is ugly, desperate, and incredibly loud. Miller was screaming, a feral sound of a trapped animal, as 3 bailiffs wrestled him off his own attorney. Harold Vance lay on the linoleum floor, his expensive suit torn at the collar, blood trickling from a split lip where his client, the man he was sworn to defend, had just struck him. Get him off me! He's crazy! Vance shrieked, scrambling backward like a crab, his dignity left somewhere near the jury box. Secure the defendant, I ordered, my voice cutting through the noise. It took 4 men to finally pin Miller to the ground and shackle his hands behind his back. He was panting, his face pressed against the same floor where he had once forced Elias Thorne. The irony was not lost on me, nor on the jury, who watched in stunned silence. Mr. Vance, I said, looking down at the lawyer, who was now trying to stand up, wiping blood from his mouth with a trembling hand. You have a problem. Vance looked up, his eyes wide. Your Honor, I am the victim here. He attacked me. I want to press charges. Oh, you will have plenty of time for charges, I said coldly, but not the ones you think. Did you hear what your client just screamed, Mr. Vance? He said you knew. He said you told him to keep the kit. He said you called it standard practice. Vance paled. That is privileged communication. Even if he said it, it's hearsay. It's attorney-client privilege. You cannot use that. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the bench. I love this part of the law. It is the moment where the shield becomes a sword. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dropping to a lecture tone, you are forgetting United States v. Zolan. You are forgetting the crime fraud exception. Attorney-client privilege does not apply if the communication was made for the purpose of committing a crime or covering up fraud. Planting evidence is a crime. Suborning perjury is a crime. If you advised your client to maintain a drop kit to frame citizens, you are not his lawyer anymore. You are his accomplice. The color drained from Vance's face completely. He looked at D.A. Sterling, hoping for an ally, but Sterling was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and he knew exactly who to eat to survive. Sterling stepped forward, smoothing his jacket. The arrogance was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice steady, based on the defendant's spontaneous utterance and the physical evidence presented, the district attorney's office is treating Mr. Vance as a person of interest in this conspiracy. We are moving to impound his files immediately. Vance looked at Sterling with betrayal. Marcus, we play golf. You can't do this. I just did, Sterling replied, not even looking at him. I watched them turn on each other. It was inevitable. Corruption is a team sport until the handcuffs come out. Then, it's every rat for himself. Bailiff, I commanded. Take Mr. Vance into custody for contempt of court and suspicion of conspiracy to obstruct justice. He can share a holding cell with his client. I imagine they have a lot to discuss. As Vance was led away, protesting weakly, the courtroom felt different. The air was lighter. The heavy blanket of lies had been lifted, leaving only the stark, undeniable truth. I turned my attention back to the gallery, to the back row where Elias Thorne's parents sat holding hands, weeping, to the chief of police, who looked like he was praying for the floor to open up and swallow him, and finally, to Elias Thorne. The young man was sitting straight now. The fear that had defined him for months was gone. In its place was something else, disbelief. He looked at me as if he couldn't process that the system, the giant crushing machine that had tried to destroy him, had actually worked. Mr. Thorne, I said gently. Elias looked up, startled. I want to apologize to you, I said. The room went silent again. Judges don't usually apologize. I am sorry that this building failed you, I continued. I am sorry that the people sworn to protect you decided to hunt you instead. I am sorry that you had to sit here and listen to them lie about your character. You should never have been in that defendant's chair. Elias nodded, tears spilling over. Thank you, Your Honor, but an apology is not justice, I said, my voice hardening again as I looked at the prosecutor. Mr. Sterling, I assume you have a motion to make? Sterling cleared his throat. He knew he had no choice. Yes, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Elias Thorne with prejudice. Furthermore, he paused, looking at the press gallery. We are opening an immediate review of the conviction of Arthur Hayes. Good, I said, but we are not done, because there is still the matter of sentencing for the man who started this fire. I looked down at Miller, who was now seated again, shackled to the table, his head hanging low. Derek Miller, I said. You stand convicted by your own admission and by overwhelming evidence of assault, perjury, and fabrication of evidence. You destroyed lives to save your career. You broke bones to feed your ego. I picked up my gavel. It felt heavy today. I am going to do something now that I rarely do, I announced. I am going to bypass the sentencing hearing. The guidelines are clear, and your crimes are egregious. But before I pass sentence, I want you to watch one last thing. I pointed to the screen. Bailiff, play the last 5 seconds of the cache again. Just the audio. The room filled with the sound once more. Snap. Then, silence. Then, Miller's voice, whispering to himself in the dark car. Got him. I hadn't played that part before. You whispered. Got him, I said, my voice trembling with disgust. You treated a citizen like a trophy. I took a deep breath. Stand up, Mr. Miller. Derek Miller stood up. The swagger was gone. The arrogance that had filled the room in part one had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man who realized, too late, that the badge was a responsibility, not a crown. Officer Miller, I said, my voice echoing in the silent courtroom. You treated the law as a suggestion, and the citizens you swore to protect as targets. You believed that because you wore a uniform, you were the master of the truth. You thought you could turn off the lights and do whatever you wanted in the dark. I leaned forward. But in this courtroom, the lights are always on. Miller looked down at his hands, the same hands that had planted a screwdriver and snapped a bone. On the charge of aggravated assault under color of authority, I announced, I sentence you to 10 years in state prison. Miller flinched. But I wasn't done. On the charge of perjury, I continued, I sentence you to 5 years. On the charge of fabrication of physical evidence, I added 5 years. And on the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, I finished staring at the terrified chief of police in the back row, another 5 years. Miller's head snapped up. 25 years? He gasped. Judge, that's a life sentence for a cop. You can't put me in general population. They'll kill me. You should have thought about that before you sent Arthur Hayes to that same prison with your lies, I replied coldly. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. You will serve every single day of those 25 years. You wanted to be a tough guy on the street, Mr. Miller. Now you can be a tough guy in cell block D. I banged my gavel. The sound was final. Remanded to custody immediately. Miller didn't scream this time. He didn't fight. He simply collapsed. The bailiffs picked him up not with the reverence due a fellow officer, but with the grip used for a convict. They dragged him out the side door, his boots dragging across the floor, leaving scuff marks that would be scrubbed away by morning, just like his career. As the door clicked shut, the heavy atmosphere in the room lifted. It was as if the building itself exhaled. I looked at the back of the room. Chief O'Connell stood up to leave, trying to slip away unnoticed. Chief, I called out. He stopped. his hand on the door handle. I expect your resignation on the mayor's desk by 5 o'clock today, I said. If it isn't there, I will personally sign the subpoena for your emails regarding the Arthur Hayes cover-up. Do we understand each other? O'Connell didn't turn around. He just nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion, and walked out. He knew it was over. The rot had been cut out. Finally, I turned to Elias Thorne. The young piano teacher was standing with his lawyer. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. Mr. Thorne, I said, I cannot give you back the months of fear you lived through. I cannot instantly heal your arm, but I can give you this. Your record is expunged. You are innocent. And I am ordering the city to pay for your medical reconstruction surgery and all legal fees. Elias smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. Thank you, Judge Boyd. I didn't think anyone would believe me. The truth has a way of making itself heard, Elias, I said softly, even when they try to turn it off. Now go home, heal, and play the piano again. Elias walked out of the courtroom, his family surrounding him like a shield, a real shield, made of love, not corruption. I sat back in my chair. The courtroom emptied until it was just me and the court clerk. She looked at me, her eyes wide. Judge, she whispered, I've never seen anything like that. The screwdriver, the cash. How did you know? I took off my glasses and began to clean them with my silk cloth, the ritual that signaled the end of the storm. Because, Sarah, I said, looking at the empty seat where Miller had sat, arrogance always leaves a trail. They always think they're smarter than the machine. They always think no one is watching. I put my glasses back on and looked directly into the camera lens of the courtroom feed, the lens that Miller had tried to hide from. But someone is always watching. I stood up and gathered my files. Justice isn't about being blind, I said to the empty room. It's about seeing in the dark. 2 weeks later, Arthur Hayes was released from prison, his conviction overturned. He sued the city and won a settlement that allowed him to get off the streets for good. Chief O'Connell resigned that evening. He is currently under indictment for obstruction of justice. Harold Vance, the lawyer, was disbarred and is facing charges for suborning perjury. And Derek Miller, he is currently in solitary confinement in a maximum security facility, waiting for his appeal. But the video of him smiling at the camera, the smile of a predator, went viral. The world saw it, and no appeal court on earth can erase the image of a man enjoying the pain of another. This is Judge Boyd. Remember this, the camera never really blinks, and neither does justice.